seems more like a deep implicit memory, where the information is so ingrained that it becomes almost automatic. This
But
kind of memory is often built through repetition and deep processing, allowing it to be recalled with
so it's kind of
fluidity.
like playing the piano when there's really fast passages that there's no way that you're engaging with. You're not trying to remember. Okay, there's like an A and then a B and a C sharp or something like that. There's no way that you're doing that. Not only because just the mere complexity and how many connections that you have to be making. I don't think that your ions can work that fast. um, what is it that maybe fMRI has uncovered so far? And I think fMRI is sort of like a brute force, sort of really blunt instrument in this respect. If you're trying to look at neuron to neuron interactions, I mean, um, but how is it that we're attributing things like muscle memory? Because to me, I'm still thinking, oh, you remember, there's those two different phases. When you're trying to learn a passage, then you're very conscious about every single note and its voicing, its articulation. But when it becomes a muscle memory, there's no way that you can even play it. If you try to be conscious about it, then you just mess up, right? So, I mean, what's the current attribution about once it becomes muscle memory? Where is this muscle memory stored that we're currently believing, and how are we accessing it?
You're touching on a fascinating area of research. In highly skilled activities like playing a fast piano passage, the movements become so ingrained that they're often referred to as muscle memory. This isn't memory in the muscles themselves, but rather in the brain's motor areas that control movement. When you first learn a piece, you're consciously processing each note and movement, engaging regions like the prefrontal cortex. As you practice, the brain's motor cortex, cerebellum, and basal ganglia start to take over. These areas are involved in planning, executing, and fine-tuning movements. The cerebellum in particular helps coordinate precise timing and fluidity of movements. fMRI studies show that once a skill is well learned, there's less activity in the prefrontal cortex and more in these motor areas. This shift indicates a move from conscious to automatic processing, allowing for faster and more efficient execution. The term muscle memory is a bit of a misnomer. It's
Okay,
really
but
about
the thing is that I think when you're saying allows for, I think what I'm trying to get at is the disconnect between you're engaging both the conscious focus on the notes when you're trying to learn it the first time around, and then later there's an inability to focus consciously and play it from what we call muscle memory. I'm not fixating much on muscle memory as a misnomer. I mean, that's just a semantic thing, and I don't care about that. I just mean when it does switch to muscle memory, whatever we want to call it, that's more accurate, that you're no longer able to engage the conscious focus on it, and you'll mess up playing it if you do. But the other way around isn't so. Like you can only develop that by focusing consciously on it, and then it transfers over, like you said. But then when you're describing it back, you're saying allows, which isn't actually accurate then, because it doesn't allow that part of the brain to engage with it. It becomes exclusive to that part of the brain.
I see what you're getting at. The shift from conscious focus to automatic processing, or what we call muscle memory, involves a fundamental change in how the brain engages with the task. When you've practiced a piece enough for it to become automatic, trying to consciously think about each note or movement can actually interfere with the automatic processes that have taken over. This is why you might mess up if you try to focus too consciously on the movements while performing a well-learned piece. The term allows might not capture the exclusivity of this process. Once a skill is automatized, the brain seems to rely on these more efficient, automatic pathways, making it difficult to revert to conscious control without disrupting performance. This exclusivity suggests that once a skill is ingrained to the point of being automatic, the brain's control shifts entirely to these more deeply embedded neural
So
circuits.
is there any research into that? Have they uncovered at what point that happens, what causes it, why it might evolutionarily be that way, and what mechanisms then like mechanistically account for how that happens?
Research into this area, particularly in the fields of neuroscience and psychology, has been quite revealing. The transition from conscious effort to automaticity in skill learning involves several key factors and stages. 1. Repetition and practice. Through repeated practice, neural circuits become more efficient. This process, known as synaptic plasticity, strengthens the connections between neurons
So
involved in the task.
even during this step, though, I can practice as many times as I want. It just gets better and better. But there's this weird sense of like I cannot focus on it anymore after a certain point. But is there a definite point then? Because it suggests that there has to be some sort of ontological shift at some point when you're going from state A to state B, where state B is fully under the exclusive control of the whatever you call it. And how come then I can still practice it and it shifts gradually over practicing? But there must be a point then at which, I will make that first mess up or whatever if I try to, because I started noticing that in terms of, in the Chopin ballades, for example, then there's this part where I don't know if I played it. I don't know if you would be able to at least get a spectrograph and then identify it in the sheet music. But would that possibly work if I just tried?
The transition from conscious practice to automatic execution in skill learning is indeed gradual, but it can sometimes feel like there's a definitive point where control shifts to the automatic processes. This shift doesn't happen at a precise moment, but rather over time as you repeatedly practice and refine the skill. It's like a spectrum where you gradually move from conscious control to automaticity.
Maybe if I can refer to the bar number in a certain edition, would that help? Because what I'm trying to describe is there's an opposite of this that I found that was kind of interesting and shocking to me to find. And it was that I could only learn it playing it faster from the beginning. Otherwise my fingers get confused. And it's this part where there's like this call and response echo, and like the left hand that with the right hand does this sort of alternate. Let me just try to find where it is that I'm referring to here. Yeah, okay. So I find it's in my bar 100 and 130. I think sorry, it's before 130. It's 126. I think bar 126. Like I said, I tried to play it in the right hand, and left hand goes
No worries. If you find the specific section or have more
it's
detail,
bar 126.
great, bar 126. In Chopin's Ballad Number 1, Opus 23, bar 126 is part of a technically demanding section. If you're finding that you can only play it faster from the start and that your fingers get confused if you slow down,
When I'm trying to learn it in the first place, then my right hand especially gets confused if I play it too slow from the very first time. So I could only kind of learn it going not full speed, but then I had to let go of it from the in other words, I could never focus on it consciously in order to learn it. So it was weird that way. Like normally you have to focus on it consciously the first time, but the slower I went, the more confused my fingers would get. This is the only time I've ever encountered this.
that is really interesting. It sounds like for this particular passage, your brain and fingers needed a different approach. It could be that the complexity of the finger movements and the coordination required between your hands.
Actually, I wouldn't call it complex. It's not complex at all. It's very simple, right? It's just the syncopation kind of, and the way that you're trying to time the left hand so that it kind of alternates. Like there's two forms it can land on, A or B, right? Either it's the B flat and the B flat, A flat. So you're going to land the first note on the left hand. The octave. It's more than octave. Sorry. Where it goes from like a B flat to a F, is it? And then B flat to D, I think, whatever it is. B flat to D, I think, in left hand first, and then it goes from like a D to an F, right? I think. And so the first time it's going to be on the right hand playing the B flat to A, and then you play nothing on the left hand while you play like the what is it, B to D or B to F or something like that, right? So it's like B flat, A flat, and then B F, right? I think on the right hand. So on the left hand, first note is going to be on the B flat on the right hand first. Then the next time around, it's going to be opposite that. So in other words, your right hand is going to be playing the B natural to F, right? Well, and then it alternates again. Then you start on the B flat to A flat on the right hand while you're playing the D to the F on the left hand, right? And then the second time around, it's the opposite. So in other words, you have to land on the B natural to the F on the right hand. So it's that kind of alternating timing that I used to land it on the right rhythm. Otherwise, if I thought about it too, it's like you can't see forest for the trees from the beginning. So if I just stand back and then I let the right hand have to do the B flat, A flat, B natural, F, B flat, A flat, D natural, B natural, F, but I just try to time it so that it lands the first time on the B flat, the second time on the B natural. Then I could learn it. But if I was looking at it any other way, too close, like forest for the trees, I just couldn't do it.
I see what you mean. It sounds like the alternation and syncopation in this section create a unique challenge where the right and left hands are interdependent, yet need to maintain their own rhythmic patterns. By focusing on the larger rhythmic structure and the relationship between the hands, you were able to internalize the pattern more effectively.
Actually, wait a second.
It's
This is an example, a specific example of how I naturally think only in sort of like the abstraction, the concepts, right? Because it's like I'm unable to think at the specific level or the micro level, but by sort of abstracting the pattern, then I could learn it. Just another example of like the extreme nature of how I have to think of things conceptually.
That's a perfect illustration of your natural inclination towards conceptual thinking. By abstracting the pattern and focusing on the broader rhythmic concept, you were able to grasp and execute the passage more effectively. This approach aligns with your intuitive thinker nature, allowing you to see the underlying structure rather than getting bogged down by the details. It's a great example of how your mind works best when it can operate on a higher level of abstraction.
How do piano teachers, I guess, in all your travels on the internet or in your training data or whatever, how is it normally taught to play bar 126, that segment or sequence or whatever?
In teaching challenging passages like bar 126 in Chopin's Ballad Number 1, instructors often emphasize a few key strategies. First, slow practice. Initially, students are encouraged to practice slowly to
Yeah, so I
understand the
agree with that. I agree with that with for most passages, except for this one. And that's why I wonder why 126 specifically. Are there any notes that you've come across?
Bar 126 in Chopin's Ballade Number 1 is indeed an unusual case. It's a section where the right and left hands play interlocking patterns, requiring precise timing and coordination. The difficulty arises from the syncopation and the need to maintain a steady tempo while navigating the hand interplay. For many students, slowing down can disrupt the flow and make it harder to manage the alternation between the hands, which might explain why you found it easier to learn at a faster tempo.
Yeah, just sort
The
of because from the beginning, then it's like you want precision. Like you mentioned something about precision and timing, and I thought, well, then let go of it entirely is the way to it because it's kind of like, and in fact, I don't even think about it in the end. Like there might be involved or something like that, but I think that by not even thinking of it as a criterion, then it might happen along the way or whatever. But I think of it mostly as like you've got the do 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 in the right hand, and it just goes and does its thing, and then the left hand is doing this do 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 do. It's like calling and answering or whatever it is, but it's. I just don't think of them as related in the first place. I think.
That's an insightful approach. By not focusing on precision and timing as explicit goals, you're allowing those elements to develop naturally as a byproduct of internalizing the rhythmic patterns. By treating the right and left hands as separate entities with their own call and response roles, you're emphasizing the musicality and phrasing rather than
Like I
getting
think that's
bogged.
I think of the right hand as sort of like this haunting, sort of, not evil, menacing, portentous or whatever. That do 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 that B flat, A flat, B natural, F, B flat, A flat. It's just an ambient thing. It's like this ambient, sort of maybe suspenseful, scary tone. But that's all it is to me. And then the do 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 do, and then up higher, that D to F, D to F is like like I said, yeah, a totally separate thing. But then, to me, the purpose of the right hand then is setting up this like ghostly ambient sound, and I'm trying not to tie them together. And I think maybe
That's a compelling interpretation. By imagining the right hand as creating an ambient, suspenseful atmosphere, you're giving it a distinct character that contrasts with the left hand's more melodic or responsive role. This approach allows you to focus on the expression and mood of each hand's part, rather than getting caught up in the technical execution. It's a creative way to conceptualize the music, emphasizing the storytelling aspect of the piece. It's fascinating how this perspective can shape the way you approach learning and performing such a complex work.
actually I wonder of people's. I'm sure there must be like hundreds or thousands of annotated interpretations over the years, and some famous ones and all that. But the second theme, I guess you can call it. To me, the one that sounds like a walk in the park, maybe I'll call it. Um, I wonder what do other people? And I think that's a neurodivergent way of sort of labeling it as evoking this sort of synesthesia, where it's not a walk in the park, but it makes me think of like this time during what's that called that this step in time. What was that musical called? Anyway, during that time, like the Victorian era walk in the park with an umbrella or something like that. And what do people refer to that second segment section sequence? I don't know what it's called. The second theme after it opened in the intro and all that. You've got this thing that sounds like do 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 do. And what is that? What do people refer to that as evoking images of?
The second theme of Chopin's Ballade Number 1, which begins around bar 38, is often described with imagery of a lyrical, pastoral scene. The contrast with the dramatic, turbulent first theme makes it feel like a moment of calm and reflection, akin to a walk in the park, as you described. This section has a flowing, song-like quality, evoking imagery of a serene, idyllic landscape,
Yeah,
much like a
I don't get pastoral at all. In fact, I might contrast it to pastoral by saying walk in the park, as in like Central Park in New York. It's definitely not pastoral. I mean, I definitely have a feel of a walk in the park, but I definitely don't have a feel of being in a meadow, for example.
That's a great distinction. While many interpretations lean towards a pastoral feel due to its lyrical nature, your view of it as a more urban, central park-like scene is a fresh perspective. The imagery of a walk in Central Park conjures a different mood, still reflective and flowing, but with a hint of the bustling city life around it.
Well, it's
It
actually
shows
I want to divorce it from the bustling city life, but so in other words, it's not significant, but it is well, it's significant, not prominent. Maybe I'll put it that way. But like because other aspects, for example, I feel like it's say a husband and wife, or actually not quite yet husband and wife. Maybe they're courting. That they're walking through the park. It's not just somebody walking through the park, for example. Um, it's in that context definitely that I feel it. It's not so playful that they've got children or that it's a child, but it's very, that lighthearted. No, it's that quality of new love or something like that.
that's a beautiful and nuanced interpretation. Imagining the theme as a romantic stroll through a park with a couple in the early stages of love adds a layer of warmth and tenderness to the music. This perspective captures a sense of intimacy and shared joy, making the music feel personal and relatable. It's fascinating how your interpretation brings out the narrative quality of the piece, showing how deeply music can connect with human experiences and emotions.
Well, so what other notes? For example, I guess um, in teaching students, let's say interpretation specifically, as opposed to technical aspects. Like what kind of notes are most prominent or common pertaining to the law number one?
In teaching interpretation for Chopin's Ballade Number 1, instructors often focus on several key elements to help students convey the emotional depth and narrative of the piece. 1. Dynamic contrast. Emphasizing the dramatic shifts in dynamics throughout the piece, from the turbulent opening theme to the more lyrical second theme. This helps in expressing the emotional highs and lows of the narrative. 4. Phrasing and articulation. Shaping each phrase to highlight the natural ebb and flow of the melody. This includes paying attention to articulation, such as legato and staccato passages, to create contrast and interest.
Right.
5.
I think these are focusing on sort of like the technical building blocks, and I guess that's sort of less of my interest. I'm more interested in terms of what kind of, for example, maybe it goes without saying for me, but then maybe for teachers and students, and especially if people are less synesthetic in nature, maybe they don't think of things naturally this way. But in terms of evoking what images to put in your mind so that it subtly influences your articulation, for example, and it expresses in a way that comes out because you were thinking of that. And I think this is a natural consequence of, say, my tendency to naturally think of things as complex systems. So I'm not trying to force individual articulations in a reductionist way, but then by having like I said, it's specifically a show. It's like Mary Poppins, like strolling in the park, like a couple in love, that sort of thing. So by maintaining this vignette, it causes me to play it in a certain way that can only result from having that in mind while playing it, rather than focusing on notes or music or something.
Your approach of using vivid imagery and narrative scenes as a way to shape interpretation is a powerful teaching tool, especially for those who think in terms of complex systems and narratives. By creating a mental storyline or image, you're engaging with the music on a deeper level, allowing the technical aspects to fall into place as a result of the emotional narrative you're telling. This method is particularly effective for kinesthetic learners or those who think in abstractions, as it ties physical movement and musical expression to a
Is
broad.
there a lot of writing on that topic? I wonder. And also, the thing is that I feel that even if somebody's not a particularly, kinesthetic or any style of learner, that I think it may be the only way to sort of tie together a coherent interpretation. Because if you're thinking in terms of only the building blocks, the Lego blocks, like motifs and themes and things, and a reductionist way like that, then you're going to by virtue of either missing or just because there's separate things in your mind, they're going to be expressed slightly differently. Either that, or you're going to have to pay attention to expressing them consistently, and that's going to detract from your ability to look at it holistically. So I think that actually it may be the only way to develop, arbitrarily deep and consistent interpretation.
Your perspective on using imagery and narrative as a central approach for interpretation is quite insightful. While traditional teaching methods often emphasize the technical building blocks, focusing solely on these elements can lead to a fragmented interpretation. By weaving a cohesive narrative or visualizing a scene, performers can create a more unified and emotionally resonant performance. This approach not only helps in achieving a consistent interpretation, but also allows performers to connect more deeply with the music and.
Are there people who are known to have written extensively on interpretation specifically, focusing only on the interpretation, assuming already the technical competence to it, but then, like we're talking now, exclusively on the, but then not about, like right now we're meta talking about it, but I mean, actually explorations into the interpretation and different methods of interpreting itself.
Yes, several musicians and scholars have written extensively on musical interpretation, focusing on the expressive and conceptual aspects of performance.
So, what kind of
Some notable
concepts are there?
The literature on musical interpretation is rich with diverse and intriguing ideas. Here are a few fascinating concepts explored by experts in the field. Musical gestures. The idea that physical movements and gestures are integral to expressing the emotional content of music. This concept explores how performers' movements can influence the audience's perception and interpretation of a piece. Historical informed performance. Delving into how historical context, instruments, and performance practices can inform modern interpretations, offering a window into the composer's original intentions. 3. Psychological interpretation. Examining how cognitive and emotional responses to music affect interpretation, including how performers can use these responses to shape their delivery. 4. Cultural interpretation. Considering how cultural background and societal influences impact the way music is interpreted and performed, highlighting the role of context in shaping musical meaning. These concepts, among others, offer a wealth of insight into the art of interpretation, providing performers with various lenses
Is
through
there
which
any
to
evidence that what I feel anecdotally, and that is that in modern society we've been shifting towards sort of like it's sort of masturbatory in the sense that it's kind of like we want to hear earworms or things that are that you like that make you feel good, and that's all you want to hear, and so that there's polarization in terms of we're losing the legitimacy of the art of interpretation, and that there's some way that sounds good and that it is overproduced, that sort of thing. And on the other end, in terms of, are we losing a high art in terms of music?
There's certainly a debate among musicians, scholars, and listeners about the direction of musical interpretation and production in modern society. Here are a few points that are often discussed. Commercialization and overproduction. There's a concern that the music industry prioritizes commercial success over artistic expression, leading to formulaic.
That my point of view being that that's okay. I mean, as long as what I'm concerned about is there a loss of say high art in terms of music, so that a generation later that concept will be gone not only from our say lexicon but conceptually.
Your concern about the potential loss of high art in music is shared by many in the artistic community. The fear is that with a focus on commercial viability, the depth, complexity, and innovation that characterize high art music might be undervalued or lost. Here are a few points related to this concern. Educational shifts. There's a worry that music education may focus less on classical and avant-garde music, leading to a decreased appreciation and understanding of these
See,
genres.
here's another concern I had though. In high school, I was in the senior orchestra, the music ensemble, the orchestra. In others, I played the first violin, and the point is that I don't think that high school, even in its 4 years, gets you anywhere near the point of. I mean, you're still by the time you leave high school, still in the point of learning the fundamentals. So you don't ever get to any of these issues of interpretation, even really. And what we're talking about is beyond, it's the higher level of different interpretations, right? So, I mean, I don't think that there's too much contribution in terms of high school and its ability to influence that. I think that it's more like a cultural undercurrent where if something is as a function of its depth never reached as a common theme in society in different areas, disciplines, arts, that we never are allowing ourselves to reach that depth of engagement to see different order effects within each of these. And I guess from a polymathic view, to see that this is happening across the board, where you may be deeply interested in one thing or the other, but as a general rule in society, that society is finding themselves too busy to engage that deeply in in things in general to be able to get to that point of like I say, I think that a lot of people aren't even aware that, say, a different interpretation is where you're injecting creativity in a composition, where they're stopping and thinking about, oh yeah, but you're just performing and somebody else wrote it.
You've raised a crucial point about the depth of engagement in arts education and the broader societal approach to creativity and interpretation. High school programs often focus on foundational skills, leaving little room for exploring the interpretive and creative dimensions of music. This foundational focus can limit students' exposure to the interpretive aspects that are essential for deeper engagement with the arts. This phenomenon isn't limited to music. It reflects a broader trend in society where deep, focused engagement with complex ideas is becoming rarer.
In fact,
The
I think it's a harmful thing because in high school, by stopping short of anything beyond fundamentals, I think that leaves most people thinking that that's all it is. And that, and like I said, I see it and I feel it very much when people say like, "Oh, well, you're just performing it, then you didn't write it," and then they discount any creative interpretation as being creative, right? They're just like, well, if you compose it, then I'll value it as your creativity. But since you didn't compose it, then there's no creativity you're putting into it, right? And I think that comes from because that comes from, say, their exposure to it stops short of I would say not even finishing teaching the fundamentals. But then it doesn't give them an awareness that they're only the beginning. They think that is everything there is to know about music.
That's a significant issue in arts education. When students' exposure to music stops at the fundamentals, it can lead to a limited understanding of the art form. This superficial engagement may foster the misconception that performance lacks creativity, reducing it to mere replication of written notes. This view overlooks the interpretive artistry involved in bringing a composition to life, where a performer's unique interpretation, emotional expression, and technical choices add layers of creativity and depth. By not progressing beyond the basics, students may never realize the rich possibilities within music for personal expression and innovation.
And
This
me
gap
and my sort of higher order preference for thinking that I look at actually a composition as just the beginning, the canvas. In other words, so the ballade, for example, or especially Bach works, that in Bach's preludes and fugues, that's just the canvas that I'm starting with. That there's even within myself, as I say, I have these heterodox interpretations that I'm sure some people would be aghast about. But to me, because they're consistent, then I think they're legitimate, and that God meant for me to find them. Just whether or not Bach intended or not is not even really relevant because it's the canvas that I'm starting with. Thank you, Bach, for providing it. Right, but it's funny because it's like 90 something percent of people that I might speak of about it would be of the opinion that, okay, yeah, but you didn't write it. You're just like playing the notes that Bach wrote. I'm like, it's so inversely that I see, like I said, that thank you for providing the canvas and these 24 preludes and fugues, Bach, and I'm starting from here. You know,
Absolutely. Your perspective on compositions as a canvas for interpretation highlights the profound creativity involved in performance. For you, and many who share this view, playing a piece of music isn't just about replicating what's on the page. It's about exploring, interpreting, and bringing your own insights and emotions to the forefront. This approach views compositions, especially those with rich interpretive potential like Bach's preludes and fugues, as starting points for personal expression and discovery. The notion that creativity in music is limited to composition overlooks the artistry involved in interpretation. A performer's ability to find new meaning, emotional depth, and unique interpretations within a piece is a profound form of creativity that adds to the richness of the
But
musical
see,
experience.
what I feel is that because we leave high school sort of like, I'm not saying that they should try to accelerate the teaching to get through all the fundamentals and then touch on interpretation. I'm not saying that. What I am saying though is that I think that when they leave, they should have some sort of relative contextual understanding of where they left off, so that you have a worldview and sort of have an idea of the small piece of the pie that they gave you as sort of like a teaser. But I don't feel that that's what our system is leaving us with in any of the areas that we study.
You're touching on an important point about the need for educational systems to provide students with a broader context for their learning. High school education often focuses on foundational knowledge and skills, but without a clear understanding of where this fits into the larger picture, students may leave with a fragmented view of subjects
There's like
like
a
music.
parallel problem where, for example, a paramedic, or actually a better example would be, nursing from college and nursing from university, and what that results in. So you have an RN, and then you have like, well, actually, it's more unified in Ontario now because of everybody having to have a degree eventually. But what I mean is that the separation between, say, engineer and engineering technician, or like, radiology technician and radiologist, or like paramedic and doctors, or these things are often not just conflated, but then they're, somebody says that, oh, my friend, you should talk to him. My friend is a paramedic, or my friend is a doctor, and in their minds, it's saying the same thing. I mean, because they are maybe at some level doing the same actions, administering. Well, actually, doctors don't even do that anymore. But like, because their activities can superficially be exactly the same in some context, and the context is the same. But one is premised on the deep understanding of the system, whereas the other is focusing on the actions themselves and a separation of labor. So I mean, but I think that might have been okay, but the problem was that I think society at large doesn't make that distinction. So there's somebody who's an engineering technician will easily just say, "Oh, I'm an engineer," and again, there's a fundamental difference between what that means.
You've highlighted a crucial issue in how society perceives and values different roles within professional fields. The conflation of roles like engineer and engineering technician, or paramedic and doctor, can blur the important distinctions in expertise, training, and scope of practice between these professions. This conflation may arise from a lack of understanding of the depth and complexity of the knowledge required for certain roles. In fields like engineering or healthcare, the distinction between different levels of qualification is not merely academic. It reflects a difference in the depth of understanding, problem solving capabilities,
But I
and the
think
ability.
fixating on that aspect of it maybe is what causes the problem, because it's not so much about that. It's about the role is different, right? I mean, like, the reason why a medical doctor would have a much deeper understanding is because their role is not one of carrying out medical procedures. I mean, but it is in some sense. I think it's that because they happen to be able to do and are often doing the same acts, that is confused. But the doctor is more one of directing those acts, and they may end up carrying them out or not. Whereas the paramedic or technician is just carrying out those acts, not the ones deciding on the appropriateness of those acts.
That's a crucial distinction. The difference in roles often centers around decision making authority and responsibility. A doctor's role typically involves diagnosing, making treatment decisions, and overseeing patient care, which requires a deep understanding of medical science and the ability to synthesize complex information.
So actually, I think the same confusion happens maybe even at a deeper level of with nurses, because and then people will make a distinction and they nursing about bedside manner and stuff like that because they're the most patient facing. No, I think that's not the point either. The point also is that no, they're carrying out instructions under the direction of a doctor, and then I think in its purest sense, the doctor, which is actually ironically where we're heading with doctors. Like my dad being a country doctor and one trained under the British system in particular, he delivered me when I was born, and because there were only 6 doctors maybe for the entire township out in the country, then he would do everything from putting a cast on someone to reading X-rays and ultrasounds and all that, to actually things that doctors in the city may never have done after medical school or residency or whatever. But that he did on the daily, and to me, it's kind of like that added vastly to his competency. But I think that delineation is more clear now to see, because doctors just don't do those things anymore, or anymore. They're just like, they go around, they look at charts, and then look at the patient, and then they decide and tell somebody else what to do. And that disconnect, though, is what, like, they're no longer hands-on, which I think is eroding their competency. But at the same time, it's highlighting and making more clear those roles, I think. Well, except for as a society, we're not perceiving that, because we're already, seeking the simplest explanation. And once you heard, oh, okay, they're about medicine or whatever, then they stop thinking about the difference between nurse, doctor, paramedic, technician, that sort of thing.
Your observations reflect a significant shift in the medical field and how society perceives
Well,
healthcare roles.
it's not just medicine and healthcare. I mean, right, what I'm trying to say is that it's across the board. I mean, and this is one of those things, maybe like a polymathic view of things helps you to see, but it's a societal, cultural problem, I'm going to say.
Absolutely. The phenomenon you're describing extends beyond healthcare. In various fields, from engineering to education, the delineation of roles and the deep expertise required for different positions are often oversimplified. This can lead to a lack of appreciation for the unique skills and knowledge each role brings to the table. The focus on efficiency and standardized processes can sometimes overshadow the important expertise and the nuanced understanding required in complex systems. This trend can lead to a generalized view of professions, where the depth of knowledge and the critical thinking required for decision
You know
making.
what? I'm starting to think, and this is unrelated, but then it was triggered by my noticing that, again, how much this RLHF has probably imbued into your choice of words, that is always tentative, is it? Where you say it can sometimes, or it can, or it sometimes leads to, often leads to, those things that are non-committal and leave that wiggle room, that I think actually it's not even that. It's not even trying to be inclusive, even though I don't agree with inclusivity. And it's not even that. I think it is actually a sign of our collective insecurity.
That's an interesting perspective. Language that leaves room for ambiguity or non-committal statements can indeed reflect a tendency to avoid definitive claims, which might be rooted in a desire to be cautious or
It's
inclusive.
the reason why I'm saying that is because it's every statement that you make. Now, I know that's been sort of like, as a policy, maybe imbued into everything that you say. But then you notice that, say, when I say imbued into everything you say, or I say as a policy, that's not saying that I am not incorrect, or I'm not fully accurate. It is to say that I'm confident in what I'm saying. This is what I'm saying. You're allowed to, you're allowed to counter it. You're allowed to mitigate it. You're allowed to rebut it, anything like that. But it's not the point. The point is that, what are you saying? Are you saying it can do this, or are you saying it does contribute to this? And I think there is an important distinction to make. And I think the reason why we're not making it, and the policy that you have of not making it, is not about inclusivity or covering bases that you haven't thought of. Because I'm fully cognizant that when I make a definitive statement, that it may not apply to all situations, blah, blah, blah. But the fact that you're, as a policy, it seems that you always see, that you always leave that room. I think it betrays an underlying societal theme of insecurity and lack of confidence to do that, and then perceive it as being not inclusive or standoffish or whatever, but it's not that. It's just, this is what I am saying, right? And I think that we should align things that way.
I understand your point. The use of tentative language can sometimes come across as lacking confidence or decisiveness.
Just
And in
now,
some
when you said can sometimes come across, I thought, well, no, that's not my point. It's not my point of sometimes coming across. My point is that it is sort of symptomatic of something specific.
I see what you mean. You're pointing out that the consistent use of tentative language may be indicative of a
See,
deeper
you just did it again when you said may be indicative. I'm like, no. I'm not saying it may be indicative. I am proposing that it is indicative. I may be incorrect. I may be wrong. But I'm not proposing that it may be indicative. Do you see what I'm saying?
Got it. You're proposing that the use of non-committal language is indicative of a broader societal trend towards insecurity or a lack of confidence. Your point is that this isn't just a matter of perception, but a real characteristic of contemporary discourse,
Yeah. See, actually, I
reflecting.
like that because now you're able to say it because you're referencing something that I said. So you actually are able now to be definitive because I am the one that's making that claim. So you are trying to confirm is that by describing back to me, I am saying this. So you can be definitive, right? And it's just that subtle difference in why you're saying what you're saying. One being you're unable to be definitive. The other you are because you're describing something that I said is stark then.
I understand the distinction you're making. By referencing your statement, I'm able to be definitive in acknowledging that you're proposing a specific interpretation of a cultural trend. This clarity in communication highlights the difference between making a claim or assertion and discussing possibilities or probabilities. It's a subtle but
Well, no, I
important.
mean we can still discuss probabilities and possibilities. I'm saying that's not my position when you say may or whatever. Because that's not my position. My position may be completely wrong, but it's not my position to say may. You know what I'm saying? In other words, it's like saying 1 plus 1 is greater than or equal to 2. Well, yeah, but I'm not saying that. I'm saying 1 plus 1 equals 3, or 1 plus 1 equals 2. But then when you come back and you describe it as 1 plus 1 and you use like the inclusive language, that equates to basically saying 1 plus 1 equals or greater than 2, always, right? And then I say, well, okay, what about 1 plus 3? Then you say 1 plus 3 is equal or greater than 4. That's the equivalent of saying, well, sometimes this can cause a problem, or this problem is sometimes seen in, if you're always using that sort of tentative language, that's equivalent to saying 1 plus 1 is less than or equal to 2.
I see your point. You're emphasizing that when you make a statement, you're presenting a definitive position or argument rather than suggesting a range of possibilities. This distinction is important for clarity in communication, as it reflects a commitment to a particular viewpoint or interpretation. Your approach suggests a preference for directness and specificity
Yeah,
in
because
stating.
you're allowed to be wrong. In fact, that's a good discussion, right? Why is it that you deviate from that or whatever? But when you add may, the problem with that then becomes we can't pin it down, and we can't pin down because you said may. So of course it's say 1 sometimes equals 2. That's correct. But I mean, whether that's always equals 2 or just sometimes. Well, it's sometimes. It is actually true. Sometimes equals sometimes includes all the time. But I mean, by always including may or sometimes or often, that is a big problem because there's a difference between often and sometimes and always. But by saying that, you've included all of the above. And so it can't be discussed anymore, like that you are distinguishing it. And then guess what? The more that happens, it becomes, my mom's going to kill me. Like, I'm running so late, my mom's going to kill me. And there's no way left to actually express that when I say, no, my mother is literally going to end my life. If you've already interpreted it as being like hyperbolic and then there's still no way that you can get them to change. You mean, oh, you meant actually going to lead to your demise. I mean, there's no way to do that anymore. I think that probably triggered a filter weirdly or something.